Alright, this is the update to my previous video on drafting the wilds of Eldraine. I haven't done an update like this before for a set, but I feel this one needed it because I gave some very outdated recommendations in my first video. This one's an update using 6 weeks of data, and I want this to be a video where you can watch it and know how to draft the set and know what things to look out for, what things to avoid, and the first video was no longer doing that because things have changed a lot. So, if you've watched the previous video, I hope you get to enjoy some of the. I've included a lot about the things that have changed, and if you're a new player to drafting, I hope this will cover everything for you. The color balance for the set remains the same. Red is at the top, followed by black. Green is in third, and then white, and then blue at the very bottom. Blue has improved a small amount since then. The format's kind of self-corrected itself. Red has taken a bit of a hit, and I'm going to talk more about that later. And just overall, as the abusable decks get found out and everyone starts drafting them, the overall trophy rate for the set does go down over time. The top two picks for the set are Redcap, Gutter Dweller, the 3/3 Goblin Warrior for 4, and Realm Scorcher Hellkite, the typical mythic dragon that just takes over the set. Now, the thing that really pushes these over the edge is that they do have an enter the battlefield effect. When they come in, even if you remove these cards, they still give you something that you can win the game with. And to top it all off, they are in the best color, which is indisputably red in this set. So if you see either of these cards, just slam them. Don't listen to people that tell you not to do it. Just take it. The number 3 best pick in the set is Gruff Triplets, a card I've had on the previous list, talked about before. Number 4 is Goblin Bombardment. I'm very happy to see this on here. It wasn't on the list previously, and even though I did have it as one of the top 5 cards on my personal list, but couldn't talk about it because I can't bring my personal feelings into this, but very glad it's on here. Virtue of Loyalty, a returner. I think this was also at the near the top of the list. And at number 6, Lord Skitter, Skewer King, still has all the great things about it. It's in the second best color, and it's a very easy to cast bomb. Number 7 is the Virtue of Persistence. Number 8 is Imodane's Recruiter, the best uncommon in the set. Number 9, Two-Headed Hunter, and number 10, Edgewall Inn. By coincidence, all of these things do have to do with adventures, and I think Virtue of Loyalty was on the previous list for having really strong adventure as well. You cannot really overstate how great this mechanic is to have a cheap adventure. I think that's why Two-Headed Hunter, which may seem like kind of unreasonable to be on the top 10, it just has a cheap adventure that will usually kill something, sometimes just win the game, and then being a 5-mana 5/4 menace is a great body to have afterwards. Imodane's Recruiter is one of the greatest menaces in the set. Everyone's terrified of it. And Edgewall Inn. I had Edgewall Inn number 2 last time, and I said it was a little bit of a fluke, but I defended it. I said Edgewall Inn helps you, saves you from games where you have a bad start. It gives you great things to do in the end game. I'm very happy that after everything has shaken out, Edgewall Inn still has a really, really high placement on the list. Talking about the 2 cards that fell off the top 10 list, these 2 actually do have something in common that I wanted to talk about. In the previous video, I said aggressive red was very abusable. It can take over the game. And as the format has kind of shaken out, the things have slowed down. People are much better about preserving their life total. So these 2 cards are both really good at pressuring life totals, and that is less relevant of a strategy now. Monstrous Rage gives +2/+0, and a Monstral, which also gives Trample. This was previously the top card on the list, and it has fallen down to number 49. And even then, I think number 49 is kind of soft. It's kind of buoyed by its strong results at the beginning in the first 2 weeks of the format. Since then, it has dropped down to a below average pack one, pick one. So I would not recommend going for this card. I wouldn't recommend going for Hyper Red. That's one of the things. That's one of the reasons why I'm making this video here. Callous Sellsword also just has the same kind of strategy where if you just get your opponent to a low enough life total, it'll just win the game for you. It does still have some really cool combos that have kept it pretty high at number 13. And I still would pick this card pretty highly, but don't just expect it to grab you free wins like it did before. And I wanted to talk about the things that have changed over time. I want to defend myself for the previous list. So I have this little chart over here that shows how the pick rate has gone for Monstrous Rage. It is one of the cards that has grown the most in pack one pick one rate. Before, it wasn't really picked very high, and you can see from the chart in the first 2 weeks, this was had huge win percentages. Just having a 30% chance to trophy off of taking this pack one pick one, that is mythic bomb artifact status. It was carrying decks. However, once it got figured out that red white is really strong and you can just force it, people started contesting it around week 3, and the trophy rate basically bottomed out to uh, almost 10%, which is just terrible. This is just like taking a trap, basically. So these are one of the things that have changed. Monstrous Rage, if you want to look at it, it started off really strong. It's not a viable strategy anymore to just go for Hyper Red. Still, I would take it. I would play it. Not reliable anymore. Hatching Plans is kind of the inverse of this card, where it did start getting picked up a lot more on week 3, but it has kept up its trophy rate. So at the start of the format, this was a hyper abusable card. Only a few people knew about it. Most people were not taking it. I think more people were taking this than Monstrous Rage. And once the word got out, again, around week 3, I think is the time when the people that listen to content creators are starting to just copy them and learning how to do it. It did have a weak point on week 3, but then people went on and figured out how to play with it, and it has kept up. So this is kind of the story of the format. Hyper Red has cratered, and as we've discovered these bargain decks based around hatching plans, based around like 3 to 4 colors, the format has slowed down, and you can go for value plans like this. And the last thing that I want to, I guess the last 2 things, we have the inverse of this list later. I want to talk about the cards that have basically fallen off the planet in pack one, pick one picks. In the first 2 weeks, these cards were getting picked up really high, and since then they have dropped off considerably. Ashiok's Reaper being the biggest drop off. It's basically being pack one, picked one at a rate 30% of what it used to be. It basically, the 2/3 of the people that were first picking Ashiok's Reaper have now changed their mind about it. It is one of these cards that asks you to build around a theme that does not work, the black-white theme. Moving on, I want to talk about Chancellor of Tales. It's an adventure synergy card that is very fragile, as we figured out. I think you play with this card one time and you watch it get burned to death, and you give up on the idea. Neva, Stalked by Nightmares, is on here as well, just as the Signpost common, uncommon for white and black, which has not been doing super great. Tattered Ratter is a 2-drop in a good archetype, except its ability doesn't do that much. So people knew that the archetype was good, and since then they have figured out you don't actually need Tattered Ratter to go off with it. Elvira, like Neva, really strong uncommon. However, it is in a color combination that is not super desirable. Charade of the Numbing Depths, the white-blue merfolk that goes with the tapping theme, has basically the same idea. A Tale of the Ages is an enchantment that buffs all of your enchanted creatures, and this card was just a trap, so people have figured that out and stopped picking it. I would argue that you were never supposed to pick it to begin with, but people didn't know back then. Troyan going with the theme of... Actually, I'm going to talk about these 3 cards together. Troyan Gutsy Explorer, The Apprentice's Folly, and Sir Armont the Redeemer. Very strong uncommons. I don't want to say these cards are bad. Particularly Sir Armont's a very strong include for a multicolored deck, as is The Apprentice's Folly. Troyan, I can defend it. It is very explosive. However, these cards are not something that you want to start out with. I've strongly argued that you don't want to start with a multicolored card for pack one, pick one, because it kind of forces you into one archetype. And as we figured out that these archetypes aren't really that great to force, they are kind of flimsy. You have to get very lucky for them to work. People have just stopped picking them. And the last thing I want to share with everyone that has changed, the largest increase for pack one, pick ones. And this is probably more useful to people. The last one was the things to avoid. These are the things that you need to be looking out for a lot more. These are the cards that, after the first 2 weeks, we have figured out are the real deal, and they're just reliable includes from great archetypes. So, Twisted Fealty was the one that basically is being first picked 5 times as much as it used to be. Twisted Fealty is an active treason effect that also adds something to the board, and the format, I talked about how hyper red aggro isn't that good anymore. Twisted Fealty can still make it really strong. You can steal these big multicolored cards that people cast in the end game and just murder them with it. It is one of the few cards that deals with Hamlet Glutton from the red side. Hamlet Glutton usually just completely stonewalls you. If you steal it, you've removed their 6/6 trample and added to your side. Running through the other cards, Stockpiling Celebrant, really strong in the red-white deck, which is one of the best things to go for, and it gives you legs in the late game. It is something to have when you don't have hyper aggro. You still use Stockpiling Celebrant to win the game on turn 12 or 15, which is really good to have in your back pocket when you're in hyper aggro. Hopeful Vigil makes 2 things: turns on Celebration. The weird thing is, like, I do believe that people were taking this pretty high originally, but they weren't pack one pick winning it. It is worth pack one pick winning this Hopeful Vigil. Goblin Bombardment, I think people just needed to see this in action before they realize how strong it is. Obviously, it's on the top 10. It is crazy that it wasn't being picked that high early on. And now that we've looked at it, we're just cringing as we passed it. Cut in, I believe people thought this card was only going to be good in aggro. It turns out to be great in everything. It gives you an extra piece of material while killing something. I had this in my best commons list previously, and yeah, it's still holding up. People have figured it out. Torch the Tower, really great removal spell. I believe people were picking this high, and it's still on this list for most improved pack one pick ones, just because a lot of these uncommons aren't that great compared to Torch the Tower. Torch the Tower kills something, and bargaining can be an upside if you have something like Hatching Plans, which is the next card on the list. Hatching Plans, it took a while for people to figure out how good this is. Up the Beanstalk also kind of plays in the same space. I think Hatching Plans is significantly better than Up the Beanstalk. This is on here. I think there's been some discussion about whether Up the Beanstalk is worth pack one pick winning. The data says that people are taking it first pick more often. I'm not sure if I recommend that. However, if you are in the hyper control deck, I've been saying if you're not attacking with a creature, it is better to play a 2-drop that can set you up in the late game rather than playing something like, I don't know, Red Tooth Vanguard, or even something that's below rate like Baronati. You just give people a target for their removal. But if you play something like Hatching Plans or Up the Beanstalk, their removal just has to sit there while you're drawing extra cards. So I would consider these cards to be, they do kind of narrow you in what kind of deck that you're allowed to do, but they are definitely worth taking. Sweet Tooth Witch is on here as well. This is just on here as it goes into every black deck. It goes into aggressive black decks. It goes into defensive black decks. It's just a very good flex card, and if you do kind of brick on your uncommons and rare, Sweet Tooth Witch is just a reliable thing to pick up. People have realized that. And then rounding out, I've already shown the chart for this. Monstrous Rage, which used to be the poster child for hyper red aggro. Once people have figured out that that's a viable strategy, it has skyrocketed in picks. So it's showing up here as well. All right. And that's the end of the update. Thanks so much for hanging out and watching this for me. And hope you guys have a good time drafting.